Boots thundered against the cracked pavement. A black female cop, uniform torn, stumbled as blood trickled down her face. Behind her, gang members howled, knives flashing under the dim streetlight. She darted into a narrow alley only to find a dead end. A bottle shattered near her head, glass raining like fire. "This is where it ends," one snarled, raising a steel pipe. Suddenly, headlights flared, engine roared. A motorbike skidded in, brakes screaming. The rider shouted, "Get on now!" Who was this stranger? And what deadly truth was she carrying that made them hunt her like prey? If you want to know what happens next, stay with me until the end of the video. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button on Justice Voice and turn on the notification bell. That way, every thrilling and surprising story will always reach you. The streets of Detroit did not sleep that night. They breathed with shadows, with echoes of footsteps that came too fast, too heavy, as if the ground itself was trembling under the weight of fear. In the dim light of flickering street lamps, a woman ran. Her uniform, once neat and pressed, now hung in tatters, streaked with blood and grime. Her name was Angela Harris, and she was not running toward anything. She was running away from death itself. Behind her, voices howled in the darkness. Men cursed and shouted, their boots hammering the pavement like war drums. Metal scraped against brick. Knives and pipes clanged together, promising violence. Detroit had known many nights of crime, but few as desperate as this one. Angela's lungs burned. Every breath tasted like rust. The pounding in her head matched the rhythm of her heart, and for the first time in her career as a police officer, she wondered if this would be her last night alive. Then came the sound that froze her spine. The revving of engines. Motorcycles. Headlights flared, slicing the darkness, catching her figure like prey cornered in the open. She stumbled, nearly falling, but the will to survive forced her legs to keep moving. "Get her!" one of the men roared. The alley narrowed ahead, the brick walls on either side slick with graffiti and rain. Angela's vision blurred. Her body screamed to stop, but she clenched her fists tighter. If they caught her, if they took the small object hidden inside her pocket, then everything she had risked would be for nothing. The city would remain in the hands of liars, and her own life would end in a gutter. Out of nowhere, a light swept across the alley, brighter and closer than the others. A motorcycle burst through the side street, tires screeching. On it sat a lean figure, an Asian man, his eyes sharp under the shadow of a worn helmet. The machine skidded to a halt, blocking the gang's path. "Get on!" His voice cut through the night, urgent, commanding. Angela did not think. Instinct took over. She threw herself onto the back of the bike just as the gang surged forward. The man twisted the throttle, and the motorcycle screamed like a beast unleashed. Tires burned against asphalt, the stench of smoke rising as they shot forward into the labyrinth of Detroit's back streets. The wind slapped against Angela's face, mixing with the sting of blood and sweat. She clung to the man's shoulders, her heart slamming against her chest. For a fleeting second, she felt the kind of fear that tasted like freedom alive, but by a thread. Behind them, the gang scattered. Some pursued on foot, others revved their engines to give chase. Detroit became a racetrack of shadows and light. The city's decayed skeleton of bridges, abandoned factories, and cracked streets turned into a battlefield. Angela risked a glance behind her. She could see knives glinting, hear curses carried on the wind. "Why are they after you?" the man shouted over the roar of the engine. Angela pressed a trembling hand to her chest, pulling out a small USB drive, its casing cracked, smeared with her own blood. Her voice broke as she answered. This is everything. Proof of their money laundering network. They can't let me live with it." The man's eyes narrowed, though she could only see him from the side. His grip tightened on the handlebars. For a moment, Angela thought she saw something flicker in his expression, not surprise, but recognition. The chase grew wilder. The gang tried cutting them off, spilling into streets from both sides, but the rider's movements were precise, almost unreal. He weaved between abandoned cars, leapt over potholes, and sliced through narrow alleys, as though he knew the city's veins by heart. Angela realized then that this was not some ordinary delivery driver or good Samaritan. His control, his reflexes, spoke of training of war. They sped across a rusting bridge where the river glistened faintly under the pale moonlight. Angela's grip tightened. The bridge shook with the roar of motorcycles behind them. Then the nightmare reached its peak. The man skidded into an alley and braked sharply. Ahead of them, a dead end. A brick wall loomed, unbroken and final. Behind, headlights and blades converged, sealing their fate. Angela's throat closed. She had survived so much already, only to be trapped like an animal. The gang fanned out, laughing, knives raised. One of them spat onto the ground. "End of the line, cop," he sneered. Angela's chest rose and fell rapidly. Her hand gripped the USB so tightly her knuckles turned white. She turned toward the rider, ready to fight to the death. But what she saw unsettled her even more than the enemies before them. The man was calm, almost too calm. His gloved hand slid under the seat of the motorcycle, feeling for something hidden. Angela's breath caught. A sudden click, and then the alley exploded with light and smoke. A blinding flash consumed the space, followed by a thunderous boom. White smoke rolled out in thick waves, swallowing the gang's curses, choking the air. In the chaos, Angela felt her wrist seized by the rider's hand. He pulled her with strength that brooked no hesitation. "Move." Through the curtain of smoke, he dragged her toward the corner of the alley. To her shock, he crouched low, forcing open a rusted grate in the ground. A manhole, a secret passage beneath the city. Without giving her time to think, he shoved her inside, then followed, sealing the darkness around them. The world above grew muffled. The smoke, the shouts, the engines fading. Down here, the air was damp and heavy. The stench of rust and sewage clung to everything. Angela's knees scraped against concrete, but her fear drowned out the pain. Finally, when silence reclaimed the night, she looked up at the man who had just saved her life. His helmet was off now, revealing sharp features, sweat dripping down his face. His jacket shifted as he caught his breath, and that was when Angela saw it barely visible, worn down by time, but unmistakable. A badge, a symbol, not of the police she knew, but of something older, something secret. Angela's blood ran cold. This man was no stranger, and somehow he had been waiting for her. The streets of Detroit did not sleep that night. They breathed with shadows, with echoes of footsteps that came too fast, too heavy, as if the ground itself was trembling under the weight of fear. In the dim light of flickering street lamps, a woman ran. Her uniform, once neat and pressed, now hung in tatters, streaked with blood and grime. Her name was Angela Harris, and she was not running toward anything. She was running away from death itself. Behind her, voices howled in the darkness. Men cursed and shouted, their boots hammering the pavement like war drums. Metal scraped against brick, knives and pipes clanged together, promising violence. Detroit had known many nights of crime, but few as desperate as this one. Angela's lungs burned. Every breath tasted like rust. The pounding in her head matched the rhythm of her heart, and for the first time in her career as a police officer, she wondered if this would be her last night alive. Then came the sound that froze her spine. The revving of engines. Motorcycles. Headlights flared, slicing the darkness, catching her figure like prey cornered in the open. She stumbled, nearly falling, but the will to survive forced her legs to keep moving. "Get her," one of the men roared. The alley narrowed ahead, the brick walls on either side slick with graffiti and rain. Angela's vision blurred. Her body screamed to stop, but she clenched her fists tighter. If they caught her, if they took the small object hidden inside her pocket, then everything she had risked would be for nothing. The city would remain in the hands of liars, and her own life would end in a gutter. Out of nowhere, a light swept across the alley, brighter and closer than the others. A motorcycle burst through the side street, tires screeching. On it sat a lean figure, an Asian man, his eyes sharp under the shadow of a worn helmet. The machine skidded to a halt, blocking the gang's path. "Get on!" His voice cut through the night, urgent, commanding. Angela did not think. Instinct took over. She threw herself onto the back of the bike just as the gang surged forward. The man twisted the throttle, and the motorcycle screamed like a beast unleashed. Tires burned against asphalt, the stench of smoke rising as they shot forward into the labyrinth of Detroit's back streets. The wind slapped against Angela's face, mixing with the sting of blood and sweat. She clung to the man's shoulders, her heart slamming against her chest. For a fleeting second, she felt the kind of fear that tasted like freedom alive, but by a thread. Behind them, The gang scattered. Some pursued on foot, others revved their engines to give chase. Detroit became a racetrack of shadows and light. The city's decayed skeleton of bridges, abandoned factories, and cracked streets turned into a battlefield. Angela risked a glance behind her. She could see knives glinting, hear curses carried on the wind. "Why are they after you?" the man shouted over the roar of the engine. Angela pressed a trembling hand to her chest, pulling out a small USB drive, its casing cracked, smeared with her own blood. Her voice broke as she answered. This is everything. Proof of their money laundering network. They can't let me live with it." The man's eyes narrowed, though she could only see him from the side. His grip tightened on the handlebars. For a moment, Angela thought she saw something flicker in his expression, not surprise, but recognition. The chase grew wilder. The gang tried cutting them off, spilling into streets from both sides. But the rider's movements were precise, almost unreal. He weaved between abandoned cars, leapt over potholes, and sliced through narrow alleys as though he knew the city's veins by heart. Angela realized then that this was not some ordinary delivery driver or good Samaritan. His control, his reflexes, spoke of training of war. They sped across a rusting bridge where the river glistened faintly under the pale moonlight. Angela's grip tightened. The bridge shook with the roar of motorcycles behind them. Then the nightmare reached its peak. The man skidded into an alley and braked sharply. Ahead of them, a dead end. A brick wall loomed, unbroken and final. Behind, headlights and blades converged, sealing their fate. Angela's throat closed. She had survived so much already, only to be trapped like an animal. The gang fanned out, laughing. Knives raised. One of them spat onto the ground. "End of the line, cop," he sneered. Angela's chest rose and fell rapidly. Her hand gripped the USB so tightly her knuckles turned white. She turned toward the rider, ready to fight to the death. But what she saw unsettled her even more than the enemies before them. The man was calm, almost too calm. His gloved hand slid under the seat of the motorcycle, feeling for something hidden. Angela's breath caught. A sudden click, and then the alley exploded with light and smoke. A blinding flash consumed the space, followed by a thunderous boom. White smoke rolled out in thick waves, swallowing the gang's curses, choking the air. In the chaos, Angela felt her wrist seized by the rider's hand. He pulled her with strength that brooked no hesitation. "Move." Through the curtain of smoke, he dragged her toward the corner of the alley. To her shock, he crouched low, forcing open a rusted grate in the ground. A manhole, a secret passage beneath the city. Without giving her time to think, he shoved her inside, then followed, sealing the darkness around them. The world above grew muffled. The smoke, the shouts, the engines fading. Down here the air was damp and heavy. The stench of rust and sewage clung to everything. Angela's knees scraped against concrete, but her fear drowned out the pain. Finally, when silence reclaimed the night, she looked up at the man who had just saved her life. His helmet was off now, revealing sharp features, sweat dripping down his face. His jacket shifted as he caught his breath, and that was when Angela saw it barely visible, worn down by time but unmistakable. A badge, a symbol. Not of the police she knew, but of something older, something secret. Angela's blood ran cold. This man was no stranger, and somehow, he had been waiting for her. Detroit woke under a heavy sky, the kind that pressed low over the river and left everything beneath it looking tired before the day had even begun. To most people, it was just another weekday. Buses rumbled along cracked streets, children hurried toward school in jackets zipped too high, and shopkeepers pulled up their metal grates while sipping cheap coffee. But beneath that ordinary rhythm, 3 people were moving in ways that would decide whether truth survived or was buried for good. Maria Sanchez had always trusted libraries more than newsrooms. Editors cared about deadlines, libraries cared about memory. That morning she chose a desk at the far end of the main branch, spreading her pens and notebook like weapons. From her coat pocket, she drew the small coin purse that held the USB Angela had pressed into her hand the night before, its casing cracked and sticky with dried blood. She slid it into the library computer and opened the files. At first glance they were dull. Quarterly reports, consultant invoices, vendor lists. But Maria knew corruption thrived inside dull paperwork. Her pen scratched as she circled names and underlined figures. Again and again, one name surfaced: DCB advisory. $10,000 here, $15,000 there, always under the vague labels of community outreach optimization or compliance review. Too neat, too frequent. Cross-checking addresses, she realized DCB Advisory shared an office with East River Holdings, a shell company she remembered from a warehouse fire 2 years earlier. That fire had killed 2 uninsured men and left the city shrugging. At the time, ownership had been blurred through nonprofits and LLCs. Now the same names were back, connected to Angela's bloodstained USB. Maria printed the files and labeled the folder. Proof? The question mark mattered. It reminded her not to believe faster than the evidence. By mid-morning, she had lined up calls. A bank teller who had once whispered about suspicious deposits, a community organizer who could tell genuine charities from hollow ones, and a retired accountant who saw lies in ledgers, the way other people saw faces in clouds. She slid the USB back into her coat and walked out into the city like a woman who knew she might be followed, but refused to hunch her shoulders. Across town, Angela Harris sat stiff in the passenger seat of a beige sedan, watching the city blur past. Daniel Lee drove with the same calm precision he had shown since the night before, hands steady at 10 and 2, eyes always checking mirrors without seeming to. Angela envied that steadiness. Her own chest felt tight, her nerves like exposed wires. The storage facility loomed ahead, rows of gray metal doors crouching by the river like silent witnesses. "Why come back?" she asked. "Because people always leave something behind," Daniel said. "And because the men hunting us think fear will keep us away." They circled the block once, then again. On the second pass, Angela saw it too. A sedan too clean for the neighborhood, its driver hidden behind a newspaper that never turned a page. Daniel kept driving, his voice low. "They're watching the gate, so we'll use another door." "Oh." He parked near a tire shop, and together they walked back, their pace easy, like 2 people arguing about bills. At the keypad, Angela entered the code she had scribbled down the night before. The gate groaned open. Outside Unit 46, Daniel crouched. The dust told its own story, new footprints overlapping the ones they had left yesterday. He opened a small case from his jacket, pulling out lockpicks, a muted flashlight, a mirror, tools that spoke of a past Angela hadn't asked about. The lock gave with a soft click, but Daniel didn't raise the door. He angled the mirror under the frame, and Angela's breath caught. A thin wire stretched taut from the door to a pressure switch taped just out of sight. "If we roll it up, we trip it," he murmured. "And somewhere, someone will know the exact time." Angela's stomach clenched. "So what now?" He nodded toward a utility door. Inside, a rusted ladder led into a crawlspace that smelled of dust and insulation. They climbed, elbows scraping pipes, knees bruising against concrete, until Daniel found a panel above Unit 46. He pried it loose and dropped silently inside, then reached up to guide Angela down. The space was too neat. Boxes stacked with geometric precision. A table angled just right for a camera. On it sat a clipboard, an invoice, and a cold coffee cup. "This is theater," Angela whispered. "Which means the truth is hidden in the wings," Daniel replied. They moved to the back wall. 3 boxes labeled cleaning supplies waited. The first held bleach and gloves, the second mop heads. The third was heavy. Daniel slit the tape and opened it. Inside lay ledger books. Angela leaned close as Daniel angled the flashlight. The handwriting was neat, almost proud. Entries stretched back 3 years, cash received, cash dispersed. Initials marked many of the columns, but here and there a single O appeared beside large sums. Her throat closed. "O'Connor." "Oh." "Or someone who wants you to believe it," Daniel said, though his jaw tightened. Angela turned another page. At the bottom, a note read, "4th Thursday coffee." Beside it, initials. PM. Her blood ran cold. Philip Marston, the deputy city manager. Beloved in the press, smiling at ribbon cuttings with children on either side. Daniel lifted a pocket camera, snapping photographs of each page, quick and precise. He photographed the dust lines, the box placement, the context. Evidence meant nothing if you couldn't prove it hadn't been planted. He had just snapped the last shot when the sound came, a thump in the corridor. Another, closer. Daniel snapped the ledger shut, slid it back into the box, reset the stack so the dust line matched. Angela used her sleeve to wipe where her fingers had pressed. They had seconds. The roll-up door rattled open. Light spilled in. Two men stepped inside, flashlights cutting across the unit. "Don't touch anything," one muttered. "We just log it," the other replied. Their beams lingered on the table, the clipboard, the staged coffee cup, drifting dangerously toward the back wall. Angela held her breath until her chest burned. Daniel's muscles coiled, ready to spring if the light betrayed them. For one suspended moment, the beam hovered too near. Then it moved away. "Looks clear," one man said. "Or clever," the other answered. But they didn't step further. They stayed just far enough inside to explain their own prints later, then backed out. The door clattered shut. Angela exhaled in silence, her limbs weak with relief. Daniel waited another minute by his watch before signaling her to climb. They slipped back into the crawl space, then out through a rusted hatch behind the units. The city air hit Angela like a baptism. She had never been so grateful for the stink of diesel and the cry of gulls. Meanwhile, Maria was nursing a burnt coffee in a bakery that smelled of sugar. Across from her, the bank teller traced figures on a napkin. "Always just under 10 grand, he whispered. Again and again, classic structuring. They're laundering cash in plain sight. Maria folded the napkin into her folder. "You didn't tell me this," she said. He smirked. "Of course not." When he left, Maria lingered, then stepped outside. A van idled across the street, too long to be casual. She didn't glance directly. Instead, she turned into a pawn shop, cut through an alley, ducked into a thrift store. She swapped her coat for another from the rack, added a cheap scarf. By the time she emerged, the van had lost her trail. Maria smiled thinly. If they were watching her, then Angela had been right. Angela and Daniel walked briskly away from the storage yard, dust still clinging to their sleeves. Angela's heart was still pounding, but steadier now, not the rhythm of prey, but of someone who had chosen to fight. She turned to Daniel. "We touched it, O'Connor, Marston, the ledgers. This isn't rumor anymore. This is the bones of it." Daniel adjusted his jacket, eyes always scanning the street. "Bones don't stand without muscle. Maria's building hers. Now we set the rest of the board." Angela inhaled the cold air. Her fear had not vanished, but it had taken shape, and things with shape could be faced. She wasn't running anymore. She was hunting. And somewhere above them, in the bright gray daylight of Detroit, the men who thought they owned the city had no idea their walls were already starting to crack. The morning wore on, and the city grew louder. Delivery trucks rumbled past graffiti-stained walls, factory whistles sounded over the river, and church bells chimed the hour, as if to insist that time itself could not be corrupted. Angela and Daniel walked side by side down a narrow street, their clothes still dusted from the crawl space. Angela's heart was steady now, no longer racing like prey, but beating with a grim determination. She had seen the ledgers, touched the ink that tied her lieutenant to money moving through shadows, and she knew the city was sicker than she had ever imagined. Daniel stopped near the corner of a shuttered warehouse and leaned against the brick. His eyes, sharp and unreadable, scanned the street before turning to her. "We can't just run from them," he said. "If we stay on defense, they win. We need to set the board." "Ho." Angela folded her arms, the weight of her badge suddenly heavier on her chest. "So what's the move?" "A decoy," Daniel replied. "Something noisy enough to make them chase shadows while we move the real pieces." She frowned. "And what exactly do we offer them?" "You," Daniel said simply. "And me, in the wrong place at the right time." Angela stared at him, anger rising like heat in her throat. "You're telling me to be bait." "I'm telling you that you already are," Daniel said, voice calm. "They think you're holding everything, the USB, the ledgers, the story. If they focus on you, Maria can keep digging, and I can move the evidence where it can't be erased." Angela turned away, watching a mother drag her son across the street toward school, his laughter echoing off the buildings. She thought of her own mother's voice, reminding her that truth was worth the fight, even when the fight hurt. She turned back to Daniel, her jaw set. "Fine, but if I'm the bait, then I choose where the trap is sprung." Daniel gave the faintest nod, like a soldier acknowledging a comrade, then picked the ground. Meanwhile, Maria sat in a bakery with a folder open in front of her, the smell of sugar and scorched coffee hanging in the air. The bank teller she trusted had already left, leaving behind a slip of paper covered in numbers. always just under $10,000 over and over, structured to avoid the kind of reports that triggered alarms. It was laundering in plain sight, and now Maria had it in ink. She folded the napkin into her folder and sipped the last of her bitter coffee. When she stepped outside, she noticed the van again. It idled across the street. Two men inside, their faces shadowed. She didn't look directly. Instead, she pulled her coat tighter and walked calmly to a pawn shop. Inside, she cut through a back alley, ducked into a thrift store, and bought a scarf for $1 that changed her silhouette. She swapped her coat for another, carried the old one in a bag, and exited through a different door. By the time she reached the street again, the van was gone. Maria smiled thinly. If they were following her, then Angela's warnings were real, and that meant the story was more dangerous than she had thought. She walked to the library again, slipping into the back room with her new disguise. At a desk, she opened the folder, spreading the evidence like cards on a table. DCB Advisory, East River Holdings. Payments tied to the very names Angela had whispered. She thought of Angela bleeding in the night, pressing that USB into her hand, and her resolve hardened. She would not let fear steal this story. Across town, Angela and Daniel ducked into an abandoned print shop. Dust lay thick on the presses, old posters curled on the walls, and the air smelled faintly of glue and paper. Daniel tested the doors and windows, then leaned against a heavy machine, folding his arms. "If we use you as bait, we can't make it obvious," he said. "They're too smart for that. We need something believable. Somewhere they'd expect you to show up, but where we can control the corners." Angela thought for a moment. The park on Jefferson. O'Connor trained rookies to go there when the city got too loud. If he hears I'm waiting there, he'll believe it. He'll come or he'll send someone. "And what do we do when they come?" Daniel asked. Angela's eyes were cold now. "We make sure they think they have me, long enough for Maria to finish what she started." Daniel studied her face. For the first time since they met, he saw not just the young cop running for her life, but a woman who had chosen to fight even when the odds promised pain. He gave a small nod. Then it settled. The plan was fragile, held together by hope and grit. But in a city where corruption had lived so long in shadows, sometimes the only way to drag it into the light was to risk standing there yourself. As the day slid toward afternoon, Maria left the library and walked toward a meeting with the retired accountant. She felt the prickle of eyes on her back and quickened her pace. A reflection in a shop window confirmed it, two men trailing half a block behind, their jackets plain, their posture too deliberate. Maria ducked into a hardware store, pretending to study paint swatches, but her heart hammered. The van was one thing. This was closer, more personal. She bought a box of nails she didn't need, then slipped out a side exit. On the street again, she crossed toward the bus stop. A bus screeched to a halt, and she climbed aboard, sliding into a seat near the back. The two men followed her to the curb but didn't board. Instead, they stood there, watching, until the bus pulled away. Maria exhaled and clutched the folder tighter to her chest. Angela and Daniel, still in the print shop, waited for the city to shift into evening. Angela sat on the edge of a desk, her badge heavy in her pocket, her sleeve still sticky from last night's blood. She thought of O'Connor's face, his almost kind smile, and the note in the ledger marked with his initial. She thought of Marston's perfect grin at ribbon cuttings. She thought of Maria, out there somewhere, walking on thin ice with evidence under her arm. "We don't get a second chance," she said quietly. Daniel looked out the cracked window at the gray sky. "Then we make the first one count." Outside, the wind carried grit across the street, and somewhere in the city a phone rang in an office where a mustached clerk wrote down the time of a chirp from Unit 46. A lieutenant stirred cream into his coffee at a diner by the river, and a scarred man from the Iron Fangs scratched an itch on his brow, certain that the chase was about to begin again. Dusk settled over Detroit with the heaviness of old smoke. The river reflected the bruised sky, and the city's streetlights flickered alive one by one, halos of yellow fighting against the encroaching dark. Angela Harris sat on a worn bench in Jefferson Park, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her breath misting in the chill. She had chosen this ground, the place O'Connor had once called a sanctuary for rookies when the city's noise pressed too hard. To anyone passing, she looked like a tired cop catching a moment of rest. But in truth, she was bait, and every second she sat there was a gamble with her life. Daniel Lee was nearby, though not visible. He had scouted the park with the precision of a soldier, marking blind corners, counting exits, memorizing every line of sight. Now he watched from the shadow of a rusted gazebo, a cigarette between his fingers, though he never smoked. The ember gave him cover, a disguise of normalcy, while his eyes swept over every figure that entered the park. Angela forced her breathing into rhythm, repeating the mantra her academy instructor had once taught her: calm body, calm mind. But her mind was not calm. It replayed the ledgers, the initials, the coffee note that tied O'Connor and Marston together. She had built her career believing her badge meant something. Now that badge felt like a weight dragging her down, a reminder that the very system she had sworn to serve had its hands in the shadows. Across town, Maria Sanchez sat in the corner of a diner with her folder open between the salt shaker and the ketchup bottle. The retired accountant she trusted squinted through his glasses at the papers she had collected. "See here," he muttered, tapping a finger against the figures. "Same amounts, same intervals, always just shy of the threshold. They break the money down, keep it quiet. Classic laundering. And these initials? They're not random, they're markers. Whoever wrote this ledger thought he was clever, but repetition always gives a man away." Maria jotted notes furiously, her heart racing. She wanted to call Angela immediately, to tell her that the story was larger than either of them had feared. But caution stopped her. Phones could be traced, calls overheard. She decided she would deliver the news in person, once she was certain no one was following. She closed the folder, but when she glanced at the diner window, her stomach tightened. The same two men from earlier stood across the street, pretending to wait for the bus. Jackets plain, posture alert. Maria's pulse hammered. She slid from the booth, left cash on the table, and slipped out the side door. She had evaded them once. She would do it again. Back at Jefferson Park, Angela felt the first prickle of awareness eyes on her. She didn't look up immediately, just let her peripheral vision do the work. A figure approached slowly, hands in his coat pockets, moving with the confidence of someone who believed he belonged anywhere. Her chest tightened when she recognized him. O'Connor. "Kid," he said softly, as if nothing had changed, as if last night hadn't happened. "You look like hell." Angela's jaw clenched. "You should know why." He sat beside her on the bench, his wool coat brushing against her sleeve. His voice was gentle, paternal. "You've been chasing shadows. I told you before, some things aren't meant to be dug up. They'll break you if you try." Angela turned her face toward him, her eyes burning. "And what if those shadows are wearing your initials?" O'Connor's smile didn't falter, but his eyes hardened, just for a moment. "Be careful what you think you know." Daniel watched from the gazebo, every muscle coiled. He saw the way O'Connor angled his body, the way his hands stayed in his pockets. He scanned the tree line, and caught a flicker of movement, two men stepping lightly from the shadows, Iron Fang's muscle, their knives glinting faintly under the streetlight. Daniel crushed the cigarette in his palm and moved. Angela felt it too, the shift in the air, the approach of danger. She rose from the bench, her badge heavy in her pocket, her voice steady though her heart pounded. "If you're here to protect me, then tell them to stand down. If you're not, then we both know what this island." "Ober." O'Connor sighed, the kind of sigh that sounded almost sad. "I told you, kid. You don't want to fight this fight." He rose slowly, his coat shifting, and walked a few steps back. The two Iron Fang's men closed in from opposite sides. Daniel emerged from the shadows like a ghost, his voice sharp and cold. Wrong night for theatrics. The men turned, startled, but too late. Daniel moved fast, faster than they expected. His fist cracked into one jaw, his boot swept another man's legs from under him. Knives clattered to the ground. Angela grabbed one, flipping it in her hand with a familiarity born from academy drills. For a moment, the park was chaos: grunts, fists, the scrape of steel on pavement. Then headlights flared at the edge of the street, and a van roared to a stop. More Iron Fangs spilled out, their boots pounding, their shouts filling the night. Daniel cursed under his breath. They brought reinforcements. Angela's eyes darted toward O'Connor. He stood calmly by the bench, hands still in his coat pockets, watching the violence unfold like a spectator at a game he had already bet on. Daniel grabbed Angela's arm. "We move now." They sprinted toward the far end of the park, weaving through trees as shouts rose behind them. Angela's lungs burned, her legs screamed, but she kept running. They burst through a gap in the fence, down an alley slick with rain, the sound of pursuit echoing behind them. Maria, blocks away, ducked into a church to catch her breath. The men who had followed her had vanished for now, but she knew they would return. She clutched the folder tight against her chest and whispered to herself, "Hold the line, Angela. Just hold the line." In the alley, Daniel and Angela pressed their backs against cold brick, listening as the van's engine revved and voices shouted. Daniel's breath came in steady bursts, his eyes scanning for escape. Angela's hand still clutched the knife she had snatched, her knuckles white. "They know we're not running blind anymore," Daniel said. Angela swallowed hard. "Good. Let them know, because I'm done being afraid." Oh, Ben. Above them, the city lights flickered, and somewhere in Detroit, men in suits toasted their power while their shadows hunted in the streets. But for the first time, Angela felt the tide beginning to turn. The alley spat them out onto Jefferson Avenue, their chests heaving, their ears filled with the echo of shouts and the fading roar of the van. Angela pressed her back to the cold brick, her fingers still wrapped around the knife she had ripped from one of the iron fangs. The blade shook slightly in her grip, not from weakness but from the flood of adrenaline still boiling in her veins. Daniel stood beside her, eyes scanning both ends of the street, his body as calm as if he had just stepped out of a cab instead of a brawl. "We can't keep running like this," Angela whispered. Daniel nodded once. "Then we don't run, we vanish." They slipped down the block, blending into the thinning evening crowds. The park was behind them now, but the city felt sharper, eyes watching from every corner. Angela's badge weighed heavy in her pocket, a reminder of what she had sworn to defend, and what now felt like a chain pulling her under. They turned onto a side street where neon signs sputtered over liquor stores and corner diners. Daniel led her into one of the diners, the kind with cracked vinyl booths, and a waitress who didn't care who you were so long as you ordered coffee. "Act natural," Daniel murmured, sliding into a booth with his back against the wall. Angela followed, her hands trembling as she reached for the laminated menu. A waitress poured them both coffee, the smell of burnt beans filling the air. Around them, life continued, truckers talking about routes, a family arguing over fries, two old men playing chess in the corner. To anyone else, it was just another night. To Angela, it was fragile cover, a thin skin of normalcy stretched over danger. She leaned in. O'Connor was there. He brought them. Daniel stirred sugar into his coffee without looking up. "Not surprising, but you saw the way he held back. He doesn't want your blood on his shoes, not yet. He wants you quiet, not gone. That's worse." Angela's throat tightened. "He trained me. He called me kid, like I was family. And the whole time..." Daniel's eyes finally met hers, steady and cold. "Family doesn't sell you to men with knives. Don't waste breath on betrayal. Use it to fight back." Angela looked down at the knife still hidden in her lap, the blade catching the neon from the window. She slid it back into her coat pocket and nodded. "Then we fight." Miles away, Maria was leaving the accountant's house when she felt it again, that prickle of eyes. The street was quiet, the kind of quiet that belonged to neighborhoods where porch lights flickered and dogs barked at every shadow. She tightened her grip on her folder and quickened her pace. Half a block behind, two figures moved in step with her, pretending to be casual, but their rhythm betrayed them. Maria turned sharply down an alley, her heart hammering. She ducked behind a dumpster, crouching low, listening to their footsteps. One voice muttered, "She went this way." Another answered, "Boss says don't grab her yet. Just keep her scared." Her stomach twisted. They weren't just following, they were hurting. She slipped her phone from her pocket, her thumb hovering over Angela's number, but she stopped. A call could be traced. Instead, she typed a single word into a draft message, Wednesday. It was the code she and Angela had agreed on at the church. If the word ever reached Angela, it meant Maria was in danger. The footsteps faded. Maria stayed crouched for another minute, then slipped out the far end of the alley and hailed a cab. The driver glanced at her scarf and new coat, then at her eyes in the rearview mirror. She forced a smile. "Library," she said. Back at the diner, Angela's pager buzzed against her hip. She pulled it out and frowned. On the tiny green screen, one word blinked, Wednesday. Her blood ran cold. She looked up at Daniel. "It's Maria. She's in trouble." Daniel didn't hesitate. He tossed cash on the table and stood. Then we move, but careful. If they're on her, they're on us too. Oh. They slipped out into the night, the city alive with neon and sirens. Daniel led Angela through back streets, cutting between warehouses and alleys, his instincts guiding them like a map burned into his memory. Angela's mind raced with images of Maria, her friend, hunched over a notebook, her laugh echoing from college days, her stubborn courage in chasing stories no one else would touch. She couldn't lose her. Not now. Not to these men. The cab carrying Maria pulled up outside the library. She paid quickly and ducked inside, clutching the folder to her chest. The library was nearly empty, only a handful of students hunched over laptops, the air filled with the smell of old paper and disinfectant. She moved quickly to the back, sliding into her usual corner. For a moment she let herself believe she was safe, wrapped in the silence of the stacks. But outside, a dark van rolled slowly past the library entrance. The driver lifted a phone to his ear. "She's here." "Aye." Angela and Daniel reached the block minutes later, slipping into the shadows across the street. Angela spotted the van immediately, the way it lingered, the way its headlights dimmed just enough to hide. She gritted her teeth. "They've boxed her in." Daniel's voice was low, steady. "Then we unbox her." They crossed the street quickly, Daniel's movements precise, Angela's heart pounding. Inside, Maria sat hunched at her desk, her pen scratching furiously across paper, unaware of the figures moving closer through the aisles. Angela pushed through the doors just as one of the men reached Maria's table. The man froze, surprised by the sight of Angela in her torn coat, badge glinting faintly under the fluorescent lights. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered. Angela's voice rang sharp and clear across the library. "Step away from her." "Oh." Maria looked up, her eyes wide with relief, then fear as she saw the second man closing in from the other side. Before he could grab her, Daniel appeared from the shadows, his arm wrapping around the man's neck, pulling him back with a grunt. The library exploded into chaos, books tumbling, students shouting, the clatter of fists on shelves. Angela lunged forward, shoving Maria behind her, her fist connecting with the first man's jaw. He staggered but didn't fall. His knife flashed, slashing across the table, scattering papers. Angela ducked, driving her shoulder into his chest, forcing him back against a shelf. The impact rattled books loose, hardcovers raining down. Daniel held the second man in a chokehold, his face expressionless as the man clawed at his arms. With a swift twist, Daniel dropped him unconscious to the floor. Angela wrestled with the first, their grunts echoing through the library. Finally, with a sharp kick to his knee, she sent him crashing to the ground. The silence afterward was deafening, broken only by Maria's ragged breaths. She clutched her folder to her chest, eyes wide. "They're not stopping, Angela. They'll keep coming." Angela pulled her to her feet. "Then we don't give them the chance." Daniel grabbed the unconscious man's phone from his pocket, scanning it quickly. He just sent a message. "Reinforcements are coming." He looked at both women, his voice like steel. "We leave. Now." Together they slipped out a side door into the night, the city waiting, the van still idling by the curb. Daniel guided them into the shadows, leading them away before the next wave arrived. Angela kept her grip tight on Maria's arm, her mind racing. The fight was no longer just hers. Now the three of them were bound together, carrying secrets that could topple men in power and hunted by those willing to kill to keep them hidden. The night air outside the library was sharp, carrying the smell of wet pavement and exhaust. Angela kept one hand on Maria's arm, pulling her quickly down the narrow side street while Daniel walked ahead, scanning every shadow. Behind them, the echo of sirens drifted closer, not because the police had been called. Angela knew better than to expect backup, but because O'Connor's people were tightening the circle. Maria's breath came in ragged bursts as she clutched the folder against her chest. "They were waiting for me, inside the library, in the aisles like they knew I'd be there." Angela kept her voice steady, though her heart was pounding. "They're not guessing anymore. They've got eyes everywhere. That means we can't trust any place that feels safe." Daniel stopped at the corner and raised a hand. A dark sedan rolled slowly past, two men inside pretending to argue over the radio. When the car turned out of sight, he led the women across the street into the shadows of an abandoned laundromat. The glass front was cracked, the neon sign long dead, but inside there was space to breathe. They crouched among the rusting machines. Daniel pulled the unconscious man's phone he had taken from the library, scrolling through the last few messages. His face hardened. They've been tracking us in real time. Every move, every sighting gets reported back. Angela cursed under her breath. Which means O'Connor isn't just part of this, he's orchestrating it. Maria sank onto a broken chair, wiping sweat from her forehead. The ledger proves it. The payments, the initials, the coffee meetings. It's all there, and it's bigger than just him. Deputy City Manager Marston's name shows up too. Angela felt her stomach twist. That's half the city's power structure. They've been bleeding Detroit dry while hiding behind uniforms and handshakes. Hell. Daniel's voice was cold, practical. Then we stopped thinking about survival as the only goal. Survival buys us nothing if we don't hit back. We have the evidence. We have a reporter who can publish it, and we have a cop who knows their patterns. He looked at Angela. What we need now is a way to stay alive long enough to put it in the right hands. Angela stared at the cracked tile floor, her jaw tight. We can't use the precinct. Every chain of custody is poisoned. And Maria can't publish this on her own, not with men watching her every step. Maria lifted her chin, defiant even through her fear. Then we make it too loud to bury. I don't need the paper. I've got contacts, freelancers, bloggers, even a radio guy who owes me. If I can scatter it wide enough, they won't be able to shut it all down at once. Daniel nodded slowly. Scatter is good, but scatter means risk. Once we start, we can't stop moving. They'll come harder. Angela pushed a hand through her tangled hair. They already are. The words had barely left her mouth when the laundromat's front window shattered inward. A brick tumbled across the floor, followed by the squeal of tires outside. Angela dropped flat, pulling Maria down with her. Daniel was already moving, scanning the shadows. Through the broken window came the sound of a motorbike revving hard, then cutting out. A mocking voice called into the night. You can't hide forever, officer. We'll drag you out and hang you with your own badge. Angela's blood ran cold, but she forced herself to stay still. Daniel crouched beside her, whispering, They're testing, seeing if we run. Maria's hand shook as she held the folder tighter. If they find us, they won't, Daniel cut her off. He slipped toward the back of the laundromat, motioning for them to follow. They pushed through a rusted door into a narrow alley that smelled of damp and garbage. Daniel led them quickly, weaving through side streets until the sound of the bike faded. They didn't stop until they reached the edge of the river, where an old warehouse slouched against the water, its windows boarded and its walls tagged with graffiti. Daniel pried open a side door and ushered them inside. The air was damp, filled with the scent of rust and river weeds. This will hold for an hour, he said. Not longer. Angela dropped onto a wooden crate, her body aching. She stared at the knife in her pocket, the one she had taken from an iron fang in the park. It was ugly, the kind of weapon bought for intimidation, not craft. She thought about O'Connor's calm face, as he'd stood by the bench while his men closed in. She wanted to believe there was still a piece of the man who had once taught her how to read a crime scene, how to talk to frightened witnesses. But the ledger's ink and the knife in her hand told her otherwise. Maria spread the folder open on another crate, the ledgers and reports fanned out like a grim puzzle. It's all here. The payments, the shell companies, the initials. If we can push this out wide, we'll have them. But we need to make copies before we move. If they take me out, at least the evidence survives. Daniel pulled a small portable scanner from his pack, an old habit from his days in the unit that never officially existed. He powered it on with a quiet hum and began feeding pages through, one after another. We'll make 3 copies. Hide them in different places. That way, even if they burn one trail, another survives. Angela watched the scanner glow faintly in the dark, her pulse slowing for the first time in hours. And then what? We just keep running? Daniel shook his head. We don't run, we strike. You know their patterns, Angela. You know how O'Connor thinks. If we can anticipate his next move, we can set the snare instead of walking into his. Maria leaned forward. And we'll need to time it with the release of the evidence. If they're chasing you, they'll miss the moment the story goes live. Angela exhaled, steady now, the decision crystallizing inside her. Then that's the plan. I'll be the bait again. I'll give O'Connor exactly what he wants a meeting. While he's busy trying to bury me, Maria pushes the story. And Daniel, she looked at him, the glint of the old badge still faint on his jacket. You make sure we live long enough to see it happen. Daniel gave the smallest of smiles, one without warmth but filled with respect. That I can do. For a moment, the three of them sat in silence, the warehouse creaking around them, the river lapping against the pilings. Outside, the city moved on, cars honked, dogs barked, neon buzzed. But inside, a fragile alliance had hardened into something stronger. Yet none of them saw the shadow that lingered across the street, a figure leaning against a lamppost, phone pressed to his ear. His voice was calm, almost amused. Yeah, they're together now, all three. Warehouse by the river. He paused, listening. Then he smiled. Understood. The hunter had found the nest, and the night was far from over. The warehouse by the river creaked in the night wind, its rusted beams groaning like an old ship left too long in harbor. Inside, Angela sat on a crate with her badge heavy in her pocket and a knife clenched in her hand. Daniel crouched by the small scanner, feeding ledger pages through, methodical as always. Maria leaned over the makeshift table, scribbling names and arrows across her notebook, her hair falling loose from its knot. For a brief hour, the three of them had felt like they were building something stronger than fear. But then the sound came, a car door slamming, another, then the low rumble of voices outside, growing louder, closer. Angela's head snapped up. Daniel froze mid-motion, his instincts screaming before his words did. He killed the scanner's hum with a flick and signaled for silence. Maria's eyes widened. Already? They found us, Angela whispered. Daniel moved to the boarded window and peeled back a sliver. His jaw tightened. 2 vans, 4 men by the door, more waiting in the street. Angela's blood turned cold. How? Daniel didn't answer. He didn't need to. Someone had been watching from the start. The circle had always been closing. He turned quickly, his voice clipped. We hold them long enough to move. There's a service tunnel under the floor used to drain into the river. That's our exit. But if they get inside too soon, we're boxed. Maria's hands shook as she clutched the folder to her chest. Then we can't let them in. The first blow came against the warehouse door, metal rattling in its frame. A voice shouted, Come on out, officer. You've been playing detective too long. Time to clock out for good. Laughter followed, harsh and eager. Daniel pulled a pistol from his jacket, checked the chamber, then slipped another into Angela's hand. She stared at it for a beat. She hadn't drawn her service weapon since this began, hadn't wanted to believe it would come to this. But tonight there was no room for hesitation. She nodded and racked the slide. The second blow bent the lock. The third sent the door slamming inward. 4 iron fangs poured through, knives flashing under the weak light. Angela's body moved before her mind did 2 shots rang out, one man dropping with a scream, another stumbling back clutching his shoulder. Daniel moved like a storm, firing once, then swinging the butt of his pistol into another man's jaw. Maria crouched low, clutching the evidence tight as splinters flew from the doorframe. She wanted to close her eyes, to vanish, but instead she forced herself to watch. This was the cost of the truth she had sworn to tell. More footsteps thundered outside. Daniel grabbed Angela's arm, pulling her toward the far corner. Tunnel, now! They ran across the warehouse as bullets sparked against metal. Angela fired once more over her shoulder, sending the men diving for cover. Daniel kicked aside a rotted pallet, revealing a rusted grate in the floor. He yanked it up with a grunt, the stench of river water rushing upward. Go, he barked. Maria hesitated only a second before lowering herself into the darkness, clutching the folder. Angela followed, the knife in one hand, the pistol in the other. Daniel slid in last, pulling the grate back over their heads. The tunnel was narrow, the water ankle-deep, the air thick with mildew. Above them, the warehouse exploded with noise shouts, boots, the crash of crates. Then a new voice cut through, calm and commanding. Angela froze. She knew it. O'Connor. Find them, he ordered, and bring me the cop alive. The others? I don't care. Angela's heart pounded in her ears. The man who had trained her, the man who had called her kid, was now hunting her like prey. She wanted to scream, but Daniel's hand pressed against her shoulder, steady, grounding. He whispered, Keep moving. They slogged through the tunnel, water splashing softly with each step. The grate behind them clanged open, light spilling into the dark. Voices echoed down, growing closer. Maria stumbled, nearly dropping the folder. Angela caught her arm, whispering, "Hold on, we're almost there." Daniel pushed ahead, finding a rusted ladder that climbed toward another grate. He tested it with his weight, then shoved. The grate resisted, then gave way with a screech. Cold night air rushed in, carrying the smell of the river. They scrambled up one by one, emerging onto the rocky embankment. The river lapped dark and steady, the city lights reflecting off its surface. Behind them, shouts echoed from the tunnel. They didn't have long. Daniel pointed downriver. "There's an old ferry dock. If we reach it, we can disappear into the industrial yards." They ran along the water's edge, feet slipping on wet stone. Angela's lungs burned, but she pushed harder, Maria's footsteps stumbling beside her. Daniel stayed ahead, guiding them with the precision of a man who had memorized every escape route the city offered. Halfway to the dock, headlights flared on the road above. A van screeched to a halt, doors flying open. More iron fangs spilled out, sliding down the embankment with shouts and knives gleaming. Angela turned, raising her pistol. The first shot cracked, sending a man sprawling into the rocks. Another lunged, blade raised, but Daniel was there, tackling him into the river with a splash. They grappled in the dark water, Daniel's face a mask of cold fury until he shoved the man under and didn't let him rise. Maria clutched the folder to her chest, trembling but refusing to run. Angela grabbed her arm, pulling her forward. "Move!" They reached the dock, its wood rotting, planks loose underfoot. Daniel scrambled up after them, soaked but alive. More men were coming, their shouts echoing against the water. Angela fired again, her bullets sparking against stone, buying them seconds. Daniel pointed to the far end of the dock, where a small maintenance boat rocked in its mooring, half forgotten, its paint peeling. "That's our ride." Angela didn't argue. Together they sprinted, Maria clutching the evidence as if it were life itself. Daniel leapt into the boat, untying the rope with swift hands. Angela shoved Maria in, then climbed after her. Bullets cracked against the dock as Daniel started the engine. It coughed once, twice, then roared to life. He shoved the throttle forward, the boat lurching into the river. Angela crouched low, firing one last shot toward the men on the embankment. The boat surged into the dark, the city lights shrinking behind them. Angela felt the wind sting her face, the river spray cold on her skin. Maria clutched the folder tight, eyes wide with fear and determination. Daniel kept his hands steady on the wheel, his face grim. Behind them, O'Connor stood on the embankment, his coat whipping in the wind, his eyes locked on the fleeing boat. He lifted his phone to his ear, his voice calm, almost bored. "They're on the river," he said. "Send the other team." Angela didn't hear him, but she felt it, deep in her chest, that the chase was far from over, and the river that carried them tonight might yet become their grave. The boat coughed and sputtered as Daniel forced it down the Detroit River, the old motor screaming in protest but holding steady. Angela crouched near the bow, her pistol in hand, scanning the shoreline for headlights or movement. Maria sat low in the middle, her arms wrapped around the folder as if it were a child, her eyes wide and unblinking. The night air was sharp with cold, and the water slapped against the hull in heavy, restless waves. For a fleeting moment, Angela let herself hope. The city lights faded behind them, the broken warehouses shrinking into shadows. Maybe they had bought themselves enough space to breathe. But then she saw the beam of headlights on the opposite bank, moving parallel with their boat. Another vehicle appeared behind it, then another. Daniel muttered under his breath, hands steady on the wheel. "They knew we'd head for the water." Angela turned. "How many?" "Too many," he said flatly. The river carried their boat past the skeleton of an old ferry dock, its pilings jutting from the water like broken teeth. That was when the first spotlight cut across the water, blinding them. A motor roared behind them faster, newer, hungrier. Angela shielded her eyes and saw the outline of another boat gaining quickly, its bow cutting through the waves with vicious purpose. Iron fangs. "Down!" she shouted, and the first spray of bullets tore across the water, splinters flying from their boat's railing. Maria screamed and dropped flat, clutching the evidence to her chest. Daniel yanked the throttle, swerving hard, the boat lurching dangerously to the side before righting itself. The enemy vessel adjusted, closing in. Angela returned fire, her shots cracking into the night. One bullet struck the spotlight, shattering glass and plunging the boat into partial darkness. Shouts echoed over the water, angry, urgent, but still they gained. Daniel's jaw tightened. This boat won't outrun them. Then we don't outrun them, Angela said. Her voice was low, steady. We outthink them. Another burst of gunfire ripped across the waves. A bullet punched into the side of their hull, water spraying in. Maria's face went pale. We're sinking. Not yet, Daniel snapped. He veered sharply toward the pilings of the abandoned dock. Hold on. The boat scraped dangerously close to the wooden posts, sparks flying as metal kissed rust. Daniel maneuvered with impossible precision, threading through the rotten maze of beams. The enemy boat tried to follow, but its speed became its weakness. With a sickening crunch, its bow slammed into a piling, splintering wood and jerking the vessel sideways. Shouts erupted as men tumbled across the deck. Angela fired again, one bullet finding its mark. A man dropped, his body sliding into the black water. The rest scrambled, trying to free their craft from the broken dock. Daniel didn't wait. He gunned their own boat clear of the wreckage, speeding into the open water. For a moment, silence returned, broken only by the coughing motor and Maria's sobs. Angela lowered her pistol, her arms trembling with the aftershock of violence. She glanced at Maria, her voice softer now. You okay? Maria nodded shakily, though tears streaked her face. I didn't sign up to fight like this, but if I let go of this folder, all those names, those lives lost, it means nothing. So yes, I'm okay. I have to be. Angela squeezed her shoulder, a rare moment of comfort in the chaos. But Daniel was already looking ahead, his eyes narrowing. Don't relax. That was just their front line. As if summoned by his words, another boat appeared in the distance, its lights flickering like angry stars. Behind it, the silhouette of yet another. Angela's chest tightened. How many of these do they have? Daniel's voice was grim. As many as the money can buy. And their money is endless. Angela felt rage rise in her chest. Number. It isn't. It's our city's money. Stolen from our people. That ledger isn't just proof, it's their lifeline. If we cut it, they bleed. Maria looked between them, her voice trembling but fierce. Then we make sure it gets out, even if it kills us. The chase resumed, the enemy boats cutting through the water, their motors snarling like wolves. Daniel steered hard toward the industrial yards where old freighters sat rusting at anchor. We use the graveyard, he said. Hide among the bones. Hi. They entered the shadow of the hulks, giant ships looming above them, their decks long abandoned, their hulls streaked with rust. Daniel threaded their boat between two barges, the darkness swallowing them. The larger boats moved past, searching, their spotlights sweeping the water. Angela held her breath, crouched low beside Maria. Daniel killed the engine, letting their vessel drift silently. The shouts of the Iron Fangs echoed faintly, fading as the boats searched downriver. For the first time in hours, the three of them sat still, hearts pounding, listening to the lap of water against steel. Then Maria spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. There's something in the ledger I didn't tell you yet. I saw it this morning, but I wasn't sure. Angela turned sharply. What? Maria opened the folder, flipping to one of the copied pages. Her finger tapped a note scrawled in the margin. It's not just O'Connor. It's not just Marston. There are initials here, DHCK, and those match sitting judges. Her voice cracked. They own the courts, too. Angela's stomach dropped. The walls of corruption were higher than she had ever imagined. So even if we bring this in, they'll bury it, Maria whispered, unless we go outside the system completely. Daniel's eyes glinted in the dark. Then that's what we do. No more trusting institutions. We go straight to the people. Angela looked out at the black river, the hulks of forgotten ships looming like ghosts. She had spent her whole life believing the system, flawed as it was, could be fixed from inside. But tonight, soaked in fear and fury, she knew that illusion was gone. The fight ahead would not be clean, it would not be legal, but it would be theirs. In the distance, the roar of enemy engines began to turn back, closing in once more. Daniel started the motor quietly, his hands firm on the wheel. We move before the wolves smell blood again. Angela tightened her grip on her pistol. Maria clutched the folder like a shield. And together, in the shadow of the city's rusted giants, they prepared to face the next wave. The motor coughed as Daniel guided the battered boat into a shadowed inlet where the river bent sharply against a line of crumbling brick. An abandoned factory loomed above them, its smokestacks rusted through, its windows shattered. The place smelled of damp stone and old iron, a forgotten corner of Detroit where no one bothered to look anymore. Daniel cut the engine and let the boat drift the last few yards, bumping softly against the rotting timbers of a small dock. Angela climbed out first, her boots scraping the wood, her pistol still drawn. Every sound made her nerves prickle, the flap of wings from a nesting pigeon, the hollow echo of water slapping against steel. She scanned the shadows, then gave a small nod. Clear. For now. Maria followed, clutching the folder as tightly as ever. Her hands were numb, her hair damp from river spray, but her eyes burned with stubborn fire. I can't believe I'm saying this, but this dump feels safer than anywhere else we've been. Daniel hauled himself onto the dock, his face unreadable. Safe is temporary, but temporary will have to do. They slipped into the factory through a side door that hung crooked on its hinges. Inside, the air was thick with dust. Shafts of moonlight pierced through holes in the roof, illuminating piles of broken machinery and graffiti-scrawled walls. Angela's flashlight beam cut across the darkness, catching the outlines of rusted gears and collapsed scaffolding. The place was vast, a cathedral of abandonment. Daniel led them to a small office on the second floor, its door still intact. He kicked away debris and motioned them inside. We'll hole up here, one way in, one way out. Easier to defend. Angela lowered herself onto a dented metal chair, every muscle aching. She set her pistol on the desk and rubbed her face with both hands. The night had stripped away whatever illusions she had left. O'Connor wasn't just compromised, he was leading the hunt. Marston wasn't just a name in a ledger, he was buying and selling the city. And now Maria's discovery about the judges meant the rot reached even deeper. Maria spread the folder open on the desk, her hands trembling slightly. I've been thinking, even if we get this to the papers, they'll bury it. Editors will get calls, advertisers will pull money, and suddenly the story disappears. But if we scatter it, if we give it to everyone at once, then they can't silence all of it. Angela looked up. You mean go around the system? Maria nodded. Exactly. I know people, independent reporters, bloggers, radio hosts who stream out of their basements. Alone, they don't have reach. But together? If we flood the city with this, all at once, it'll spread faster than they can smother it. Daniel leaned against the wall, arms crossed. That kind of flood makes noise, and noise draws fire. You'll need time to line those people up, time we may not have. Angela's voice cut in, sharper than she intended. Then we make the time. She rose, pacing the small office. Her boots crunched on broken glass. I've been a cop long enough to know one thing. Predators don't stop unless you force them to. O'Connor thinks he owns me. Marston thinks he owns this city. Fine, let's show them they don't. Maria's eyes flicked to Angela's. Admiration and fear mingled. You'd risk your life to be bait again? Angela stopped pacing and met her gaze. If that's what it takes, they already want me. Let them chase me while you spread the truth. Daniel's eyes narrowed. Bait only works once. After that, they adapt. If we do this, it has to be more than a distraction. It has to be a trap. Angela tilted her head. What do you suggest? He moved closer to the desk, tapping the ledger with one finger. These books don't just prove corruption, they map it. Every payment, every shell company, every meeting spot. If we can predict their next move, we can stage our own, give them a reason to come to us, in a place we control. Angela thought of the park, of O'Connor's calm face as knives closed in around her. The rage burned hot again. You're saying we turn the hunt around? Exactly, Daniel said. We dangle something they can't resist. Maybe a fake meeting with a contact. Maybe a promise of more evidence. Whatever it is, it pulls them in. While they're busy, Maria makes the release. Maria leaned back, her mind racing. It could work. But once this story breaks wide, they'll know who gave it legs. They'll come after me harder than ever. Angela rested a hand on her shoulder. Then you won't be alone. For the first time since the night began, Silence settled over the room without fear. Outside, the river lapped against the shore, the city lights distant and faint. Inside, three people who had started the night as strangers now sat bound by something stronger than circumstance, the need to fight back. Maria closed the folder and exhaled. All right, tomorrow I start lining up my contacts. By the end of the week, we'll have the channels ready. But Angela Daniel, if this works, will be declaring war on half the city's power. They won't stop until one of us is in the ground. Angela's hand tightened on her pistol. Then we make sure it's not us. Daniel nodded once, like a man sealing a pact. From here on out, no turning back. The factory groaned around them as the night wind pressed against its walls. The city outside was still hunting, still corrupt, still dangerous. But in that forgotten office above the river, a fragile plan had been born, a plan that could either save Detroit or bury them all. And somewhere across the city, in an office warm with lamplight, O'Connor poured himself a glass of whiskey and smiled faintly as he studied a file on his desk. Inside were photos of Angela, Daniel, and Maria taken from the shadows. He tapped one finger against Angela's face and murmured, "Run as far as you like, kid. I'll still be there when you fall." The morning broke gray and thin, light leaking through the cracked roof of the factory office. Angela woke first, her back aching from the metal chair she'd used as a bed. For a moment she forgot where she was, then the smell of rust and river water brought it all back. She rubbed her eyes, listening to the steady rhythm of Daniel's breathing from his corner and the quiet scratching of Maria's pen. Maria hadn't slept. She sat at the desk, the ledger spread open in front of her, writing furiously into her notebook. Names, numbers, arrows. Every few minutes she tore out a page, folded it, and slipped it into an envelope. A stack of envelopes already sat by her elbow. Angela stretched and moved closer. "What are those?" "Seeds," Maria said, not looking up. "I'll scatter them today. If they catch me, at least pieces of the story survive." Angela picked one up. On the front was a hand-scribbled name, Hector Ramirez, a local radio host known for ranting about City Hall corruption. Another envelope was marked the Rust Belt Journal, a small online publication that thrived on anger and truth. Angela felt something stir in her chest. Hope, maybe, or at least momentum. Daniel stirred awake, pushing himself upright with the ease of someone who never slept deeply. He checked his watch, then scanned the room with sharp eyes. "We can't stay here past noon. They'll sweep the riverbank sooner or later." Angela nodded. "Then we move before they do. But not just running, we need to give them something to chew on." Daniel leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. A trap, something O'Connor can't ignore. Maria finally looked up, dark circles under her eyes. What could possibly lure him in? He already thinks he's got us cornered. Angela's jaw tightened. "Then we let him think he's right. We plant word that I've agreed to hand myself over, on one condition, that I get to give him the rest of the evidence personally. He won't be able to resist showing up, not when he believes it's his chance to shut me down for good." Daniel considered it, his face unreadable. "Risky. He could just send his men." Angela met his eyes. "You know him better than I do, but I know pride. He'll want to look me in the eye. He'll want to gloat." Daniel gave a slow nod. "Then we control the ground, somewhere isolated, where we can set the angles. A place with exits for us, but none for him." Maria chewed her lip. "And while you do that, I'll start the release. Not the full drop yet, just enough to make noise. If the right people start whispering, it'll draw their attention even harder." Angela thought for a moment, then turned to Maria. "You can't move alone. Too dangerous. We'll get you to a safe house first." Maria shook her head, fire sparking in her tired eyes. "Angela, if I hide, this dies. The whole city depends on people like me pushing it into the light. You said it yourself, we can't trust the system. Well, I am the system now, whether I like it or not." Angela exhaled, half in frustration, half in admiration. "Stubborn," she muttered. "Journalist." Maria corrected with a faint smile. Daniel stood, stretching his shoulders. "Enough talk. We need two things, a safe channel for Maria's drops and a stage for Angela's trap. I can secure both, but we'll be moving in daylight. That means every step we take is watched." Angela holstered her pistol and pulled on her jacket. "Then let's give them something to watch." By mid-morning, They were moving through the city in staggered steps, blending into the ordinary hum of Detroit. Maria carried her envelopes tucked into a messenger bag. Angela walked with her badge clipped to her belt for the first time in days, and Daniel lingered just behind, his eyes on every car that passed too slowly, every pedestrian who lingered too long. Their first stop was a small post office, its walls lined with peeling flyers and faded posters. Maria slipped 3 envelopes into the outgoing mail slot, her fingers trembling slightly. One to Hector, one to the Journal, one to a friend at the university paper. That's the start. Angela scanned the lobby. We can't stay long. They moved quickly, leaving the post office behind. At a payphone on the corner, one of the last still standing, Angela picked up the receiver and dialed a number Daniel had given her. When the line clicked open, she spoke in a low, firm voice. This is Officer Angela Harris. Tell Lieutenant O'Connor I'll meet him tonight, alone. I've got what he wants. She hung up before the voice on the other end could reply. Her stomach knotted, but her eyes burned steady. Bates set. Daniel's gaze flicked to her, unreadable. Then tonight the hunt changes. They walked on, blending once more into the crowd. Above them, the city skyline loomed, indifferent and silent. But in its alleys and offices, phones were already ringing, whispers already moving. The trap had been laid, and the first threads of the story were slipping into the light. And somewhere behind a desk, O'Connor leaned back in his chair, the phone still warm in his hand, and smiled. Night fell heavy over Detroit, the kind of night where the streetlights flickered weak and useless, leaving more shadow than light. Angela Harris stood at the edge of the abandoned rail yard Daniel had chosen, the cold air biting through her jacket. Rusted boxcars loomed around her like forgotten sentinels, graffiti sprawled across their sides, their wheels locked forever in place. The ground was littered with gravel that crunched under every step, a sound she couldn't hide even if she tried. She had been here before, years back, as a rookie on patrol. The rail yard had always felt haunted, a graveyard of industry. Tonight it was more than haunted. It was a stage, and she was the bait. Angela adjusted her stance, her badge clipped to her belt, her pistol hidden beneath her coat. Daniel was out there somewhere in the shadows, watching from the higher ground of a rusted crane. She trusted him to cover the angles, to see what she couldn't. Maria was nowhere near this place. Daniel had arranged for her to stay with a trusted friend, her precious folder of evidence split into copies and scattered like seeds in the wind. For the first time since this nightmare began, Angela felt something like control. The sound of tires on gravel pulled her back. Headlights cut through the darkness as a black sedan rolled into the yard. The car stopped 20 feet away, its engine rumbling low. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the driver's door opened. O'Connor stepped out, his heavy coat buttoned to the throat, his posture relaxed as if this were just another meeting between officer and superior. He even carried a thermos of coffee in one hand, like an old habit. "Kid," he called across the distance, his voice warm, almost paternal. "Been a long couple days for you." Angela's jaw clenched. "You're late." He chuckled softly, sipping from the thermos. "You always did hate waiting, but I'm here now. You said you had something for me." Angela's hand brushed the edge of her coat where the pistol rested. Her heart pounded so hard it drowned out the silence of the yard. "I've got enough to bring the whole city down. You, Marston, the judges, all of it." O'Connor shook his head slowly, almost pitying. "You think anyone's going to listen to a half-broken rookie with a handful of papers? The system doesn't bend for kids like you. It swallows you whole." Angela took one step forward, her voice sharper now. "Not this time. It's already moving. People know. You can't bury it all." For the first time his smile slipped, replaced by a flicker of irritation. "You've been running with ghosts. That man, Daniel Lee, he should have stayed buried with his unit. But you," his voice hardened, losing its warmth. "You were supposed to be different. You were supposed to follow orders." Angela felt the weight of every word. The years of trust, the lessons, the quiet encouragement, all lies. Her throat tightened, but she forced steel into her voice. "Maybe I finally learned the right lesson." The back doors of the sedan opened. 2 iron fangs stepped out, blades glinting under the dim yard lights. Angela's pulse spiked, but she didn't flinch. She kept her eyes on O'Connor. "You think you can scare me into silence?" she asked. O'Connor lifted the thermos again, sipping calmly. "Not scare, kid. Convince. You hand it all over. You walk away. You disappear into some quiet corner of the country. New name, new life. No one has to get hurt. Angela almost laughed. You still think I believe anything you say? The answer came in movement. The two men started forward, their boots crunching the gravel. Angela's hand slid to her pistol, and that was when the night cracked open. A gunshot rang out, sharp and precise. One of the iron fangs dropped, his blade clattering to the ground. The other froze, eyes darting toward the shadows above. From the crane's skeleton, Daniel stepped into view, rifle steady in his hands, his silhouette outlined by moonlight. O'Connor's face remained calm, but his eyes burned with sudden anger. "Lee," he muttered. "I should have known." Daniel's voice carried across the yard, cold and unyielding. "Game's over, Lieutenant. Walk away now, and maybe the city doesn't learn just how deep your rot goes." O'Connor's laugh was low, bitter. "You think a few bullets and a stack of ledgers make you kings of the hill? You don't know the ground you're standing on. The men above me, the money behind this, you can't even imagine how far it reaches." Angela leveled her pistol at him. "Then maybe tonight's the start of them falling." For a moment the yard held its breath. O'Connor, calm but cornered. Angela, steady but burning. Daniel, rifle trained from the shadows. The silence was a taut wire, ready to snap. Then O'Connor made his move. He tossed the thermos aside, his hand flashing beneath his coat. Angela fired, the crack of her pistol echoing through the yard. The shot clipped his arm, spinning him sideways. He cursed, clutching the wound, but he didn't fall. Instead, he stumbled toward the car, shouting, "Finish it." From the other side of the yard, more figures emerged, 3, 4, 5 men, rushing forward with guns drawn. Angela dove behind a rusted boxcar as bullets sparked against steel. Daniel fired from above, dropping one, then another, his movements sharp and efficient. Angela's breath came in gasps, but her hands were steady. She leaned out, firing twice, sending another man sprawling. Gravel sprayed as the fight erupted full force. O'Connor slid into the back seat of the sedan, blood seeping through his coat, but his eyes never left Angela's. He gave her one last smile, cold, defiant, before the car screeched into reverse, tires spitting gravel, and disappeared into the night. Angela pressed her back against the boxcar, chest heaving, the acrid smell of gunpowder in her nose. Daniel dropped from the crane, landing beside her, rifle still smoking. The yard was quiet again. The fallen men sprawled in the gravel, their weapons scattered. Angela lowered her pistol, her hands trembling now that the fight had ended. She looked at Daniel, her voice hoarse. "We had him, and we lost him." Daniel's gaze was steady. "Not lost, wounded. Men like him bleed slower, but they still bleed, and now he knows we're not running anymore." Angela swallowed hard, her body shaking, her mind caught between rage and resolve. "The next time we don't let him walk away." Daniel nodded once, his face grim. "Next time, we finish it." The rail yard fell silent once more, the only sound the distant echo of the city, unaware that a war had just been declared in its shadows. The city woke uneasy the next morning. Rumors ran through diners, barber shops, and factory floors, whispers of names tied to money, whispers of judges with dirty hands, whispers of a police lieutenant who wasn't what he seemed. The storm Maria had planted was breaking open. Independent papers carried fragments, late-night radio hosts shouted about corruption, and bloggers posted scans of ledger pages. The story was spreading like fire across dry grass. Angela Harris stood at the window of a cramped apartment Daniel had secured through an old contact. She watched the sun creep over the skyline, her badge heavy on the table behind her. For the first time in weeks, she felt the city stirring with something stronger than fear. People were starting to ask questions, and questions were dangerous to men like O'Connor. Maria sat at the kitchen table, her eyes rimmed red from exhaustion but glowing with determination. The folder was gone now, its contents scattered and alive in the hands of dozens of voices. "It's out there," she whispered. "Even if they take me, it's too late to stop it." Daniel moved silently across the room, checking the pistol he had stripped and cleaned through the night. His face was carved from stone, but his eyes softened briefly as he looked at Angela. "This ends today, one way or another." The knock on the door came just after noon. Not subtle, not polite. 3 sharp raps, the kind meant to announce power. Angela's pulse spiked. She gripped her pistol, Daniel raised his rifle, and Maria froze in her chair. From the other side came a voice she knew too well, calm, almost amused. Angela, open the door. Let's talk like family. O'Connor. Angela's throat tightened. She glanced at Daniel, who shook his head once. He mouthed the word trap. The door rattled as a boot slammed against it. Angela made her choice. Back exit, she hissed. They spilled into the alley just as the front door gave way. Shouts erupted behind them, boots pounding across the apartment. Daniel led the way through narrow streets, weaving between dumpsters and chain-link fences. Angela covered their retreat, firing once to slow the pursuit. Maria clutched her bag, breath ragged, but unyielding. They broke into the open near the river again, the city's steel skeleton rising around them. Ahead stood another warehouse, half collapsed, its roof torn away to the sky. Daniel darted inside, motioning them to follow. The final confrontation unfolded in the ruins. O'Connor entered with 6 men at his back, his wounded arm bound in a makeshift sling, his eyes burning with fury. "You embarrassed me, kid," he said, his voice echoing off broken walls. "You dragged my name through the mud, but you won't live to see the end of it." "Oh." Angela stepped forward, pistol raised, every muscle trembling with anger. "The city already sees you for what you are. You can kill me, but you can't kill the truth," O'Connor sneered. "Truth is what the powerful say at Island." Daniel's voice cut through the silence, steady as stone. "Not tonight." The firefight erupted in an instant. Bullets tore through rusted beams, sparks flying. Daniel moved with deadly precision, dropping 2 men before they could flank. Angela pressed Maria behind cover, then fired back, her shots crisp, controlled. Maria clutched her notebook, whispering prayers under her breath but refusing to let go. One by one, O'Connor's men fell. The warehouse filled with smoke and silence until only O'Connor remained, crouched behind a pillar, his pistol shaking in his wounded hand. Angela stepped out, her own weapon steady. "It's over," she said. O'Connor's laugh was hollow. "You think you've won? The names in those books, half this city's built on that money. Tear it down, and you'll burn with it." Angela's finger tightened on the trigger, but before she could fire, Daniel stepped forward, lowering his rifle. His voice was calm, almost weary. "Then let it burn." O'Connor roared and raised his pistol. The shot rang out. Angela fired at the same instant. When the smoke cleared, O'Connor lay sprawled on the concrete, his gun sliding from limp fingers. His eyes stared blankly at the broken roof above, the man who had called her kid finally silenced by the very truth he had tried to bury. Angela stood frozen, her pistol lowering slowly. Maria stepped out from behind the crate, tears streaming down her face. Daniel rested a hand on Angela's shoulder, grounding her. "It's done," he said softly. Outside, the city was waking louder. Sirens wailed in the distance. But this time they weren't hunting Angela. They were answering the noise of a story too big to hide. Reporters were calling it the scandal of a generation. Citizens were demanding resignations, arrests. For the first time in years, people believed change might actually be possible. As dawn broke the next day, Angela stood by the river with Daniel and Maria at her side. The skyline glowed gold in the rising sun, and gulls wheeled overhead. She held her badge in her hand, staring at it for a long moment before sliding it back onto her belt. It no longer felt like a chain. It felt like a promise renewed. Maria tucked her notebook under her arm, her voice quiet but firm. "The fight's not over, but at least now, the city knows where the rot lives." Angela nodded. "And now they know it can be cut out." Daniel gazed across the water, his face unreadable, but in his eyes there was a glimmer of something rare hope. The 3 of them stood in silence as the sun climbed higher, the city alive with questions, with anger, with possibility. They had risked everything, and though the scars would remain, so would the truth. And in the end, that was enough. My dear friends, if you've stayed with me until the very last moments, surely your heart has gone through a whirlwind of emotions. Surprise, anger, compassion, even a lump in your throat at the choice made by the black female police officer. What do you think about her action? Was it admirable courage or a risky recklessness? If you were in her place, what would you do? Leave your comment below. If you believe that justice must be protected by the truth, press 1. If you feel there are still mysteries left unsolved, press 0. Thank you for listening, and I hope that you too will always stand on the side of justice, even though the path to the truth is never easy.